Ladies and gentlemen, we are covering Andor Season 1, Episode 9. Nobody's listening. Before I go into the specifics here, something that comes up a weirdly large amount of times when it comes to discussing fiction is who's the most evil, right? It's weird how common of a discussion point that is. Who's the most evil character in a particular work of fiction? For many, many years, I've actually pointed to Tarkin as one of the most evil characters in Star Wars, for example. But I bring all this up because it is a fascinating question in its own right, because what it really is, when you break it down, when you crucible it down to the core element of the question, what you're asking is, what is it you define as most evil? What is it that qualifies as evil for you? I've actually given away myself very many times that for me it is personal and bespoke evil that's worse, and not to diminish the idea, but if you just blow up a planet, to use the Star Wars example, or blow up a base or blow up a hospital or whatever, that's awful, of course it is, but it's a very detached thing, isn't it? It's over there. Someone hit a button, right? Being able to do this kind of thing much more personally, much more, I hate to use this word, intimately. That tends to strike me as more evil. Well, that's a good question, isn't it, 040? But actually, that kind of bypasses the qualification, doesn't it? Because let's say we have an impersonal system, as 040 just posited, that grinds you down. That's actually even worse than blowing up a planet or strangling someone to death. Because it's both. It is simultaneously personal and impersonal. It requires the everyday interaction and operation of individuals who are harming other individuals, knowingly, willingly, repeatedly, whether they want to or not. Yeah, it's a fascinating and horrifying contradiction. I am not going to spoil a damn thing, but all I'm going to say is Divinity Original Sin 2. For those of you who know, you know. For those of you who don't worry about it. Miro pulls a lot of steps trying to intimidate Bix. You notice she even offered her the chair that they just pulled Pack out of. And we see Dr. Gorst. Dr. Gorst is a type of evil we don't see very often. I'll talk more about him in a minute, but immediately, just a little friendly wave. Yeah. And then we see an entire scene which does a really, he does, Rex. There's this really messed up scene about, I don't remember her name, Miro. For a man with very little actual rebellious activity on his resume, he was remarkably resistant, which just makes us think there's more to learn. And suddenly it's morning, and here we are wasting time. And she lays out all they learned. He got the unit from a separatist faction. Nice touch. She was the only one to use it. The Environment Pack only once before it turns over to you. And she threatens, and then she tries to relate, encourages cooperation, implication of less harsh penalties. You're just a thief. You're just a business owner. Of course, if you work with me, there's no need to get him involved. And she keeps calling him Doctor. There's a couple of fascinating things about this. I have actually discussed this exact topic before. It's called Interrogation. And I've discussed it before because I've covered both Star Trek The Next Generation and Babylon 5, both of which have one episode each, which is Chains of Command, and I don't remember the Babylon 5 episode name, that go in depth into, shall we say, very realistic approaches to interrogation. There is a playbook in which Eternus gives me entirely too many subs when he probably shouldn't do. And that playbook is a real-life playbook. It is actually something that has been developed by real-life individuals in order to try and encourage cooperation that police officers here in the United States actually operate with on a very regular basis. Intersections in real time. Thank you. That was, in fact, the episode of Bab 5. And that playbook I have unfortunately gotten to know an entirely too large amount of, because As you know, thanks to the fact that I've already given away entirely too much about this, I have actually interacted with cops several times, and they absolutely pull those tricks. It's just normal for them. And it's all tricks. It's all lies. I don't know why, but for some reason that's what bothers me the most. They try to relate to you. They try to sympathize with you. Then they try to come down hard. They do a threatening, but then they pull back on the threat a little bit. And it's the exact same pattern. It's all a lie. They don't mean a goddamn word that they're saying. They're just spewing the nonsense that they've been trained to spew in order to try and minimize the amount of effort they have to put into bringing you in. Little pro tip. If a cop ever comes to your door asking about something, they already have enough just cause in order to serve the warrant. They just might not be serving it yet because they're hoping you'll give yourself away first. If they ever ask you to come into the station, get a lawyer. There's actually a term for it. It's called lawyering up. The lawyer I got actually told me the exact same thing. He said, all right, here's what you're going to do. You're going to call me and say I lawyered up. They will know what that means. Never give them an inch. Especially if you're innocent. Never give them 1 inch. Because they will use everything they can to try and justify their quarterly reports. So she starts with the interrogation. She does all the normal techniques. And then there's a wonderful little section where Bix calls ISB the worst of the worst. Yeah, I would actually agree with that. Even in the EU, the ISB was just awful. I don't have to say anything about that. You know, there's this wonderful little bit where Bix actually mentions that Miro seems to be enjoying this. Do you remember that Miro's actually from another division of the ISB originally? Do you happen to remember what the division was? Enforcement. Don't think I didn't notice. She's a sadistic thug. And that's important. For all her professionalism, for all her dedication, for all her being the underdog trying to fight up against a corrupt regime in order to uphold a much worse regime. Like it's so fascinating. She is fighting against corruption because what she wants is evil. They even cracked her neck before the interrogation, for God's sakes. Yeah, the ISB tends to be worse than the Sith. I agree with that. The Sith are idiots. There's a reason Sith is an insult, for God's sakes. But there's another interesting thing in this little tidbit. Your coworker is killed. She's reciting all the events that she knows, and she mentions that your coworker is killed trying to win your freedom. How interesting. And I want to draw attention to that, because that one little tidbit shows that even though she's got a general picture, she's actually missing some of the details. And one of those details is a connection between one person and another. Remember that for a second. Then she talks about, you know, why would you work you check for this one? I'm saying there's a whole kinds of relationships here, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, she talks about this whole web of relationships, completely neglects that it was her boyfriend. Remember how tight-knit this community was? Excuse me. Do you remember how they care for each other? Do you remember how they've all got each other's back? Do you remember how they have an entire built-in system to communicate with each other if stuff is happening, to draw attention to things that they've used twice now? That without even hesitation, these people tried to give Bix a running shot at just getting the hell out of Dodge. Didn't even know what was up. Didn't care. It doesn't matter. Community. I think... Yeah, I heard it. I think that Miro, for as broken and diseased and wrong in the head as she is, literally can't even process the idea that there is such a thing as this kind of community. The idea of caring for someone else or caring about someone else for some reason other than some obvious thing they could write down on a piece of paper that fits neatly into the checkbox is something that probably doesn't even occur to her. So of course she misses the fact that he was her boyfriend. Of course she misses the fact that all these people are connected to each other. Of course she misses all of the obvious stuff that's so self-apparent to us because we are functional human beings who have an internal dialogue, who have capacity for empathy. And then there's this little tidbit where Bix says, "You're not going to believe me anyway, are you?" And Miro cannot help herself but grin. Just like the prison guard. that sadism, that desire to cause someone else pain. That's alien, if I can be blunt. That's completely alien. I cannot even begin to understand that. I can give it a label and say, put it over there. I have no idea what's in that box. I'm not sure I want to. Thank you, Eternus, very, very much for the subs, as always. If you happen to know what you want to put those towards, as always, please let me know. Thank you. One moment, please. Pickup 16, age of sail, armored core 6. You got it. Thank you again, and as always. So we cut to her being cut to one torture to another. Cassian has completely slipped into the role of being, you know, a prisoner. I don't have a better way to put that. That's his new job. That's his new class. And there's a whole thing about that too, which I'm not going to go too much into. He is already part of the info chain. Did you catch that? He's already inserted himself into part of the rumor mill. And if you don't understand what I mean by that, usually, I call it a chain for a reason. It's usually this person tells this person, tells this person, tells this person. He's already made connections in here. There are individuals who will talk to him about specific things. We actually see this later, too, with the one gentleman pointing out what's going on with the railing. You remember that? So he is now part of the intel network inside here. Yeah, he's friendly with Kino. He is, actually. This is a show worth a watch. There are some PTSD and a little bit too real warnings I would give for anybody watching this show, but this is one of the best crafted shows I've ever seen in my life. I would actually put it easily in the top 4 territory so far. So, Cassian talks about how they're bringing someone in, and there's a tiny little tidbit where someone mentions that everyone has to work harder now. Did you catch how quiet that is in the background? Because one of the tables, has been low a man for a while, which means they've been falling behind consistently for several shifts, which means everyone else can take it a little bit easier because that team over there is always going to be the losers. There's so much stuff they don't have to call our attention to. It's just been there. It's just there in the background. We can pick up it and go, ah. And Olaf has some issues with his hand. I pretty much immediately, as soon as I see that, he's having a stroke. Unfortunately, the medical side of my history or career is well aware of the symptoms of stroke. In fact, what he goes through is a bog standard textbook example of someone who goes through a stroke. It even takes him a while to finally actually fall over, for lack of a better way to put it. Point in fact, if they'd gotten him medical care immediately, there might have been some way to save that and salvage that. That's true in real life, too. It's still a chance. Strokes are roll the dice. A lot of things can happen. He's getting out next. Kino calls attention to it. Make sure he wears little light, tiny little light in the distance. Cut to Dr. Gorst. Dr. Gorst is just... Someone in chat said he's that pediatrician, right? I like to think of him as that dentist who's trying really hard to make sure that you're as comfortable as possible and you're okay. They're here for you, you know. Whatever it is they can do to help you be more comfortable and more relaxed. He's so amiable, so disgustingly amiable. This is what Andor does better than any other show I've ever seen, any other fiction for that matter I've ever seen. It normalizes evil. It standardizes evil. I hate to use that word. Evil is just such a terribly misused word in real life. But this is looking at evil This is looking at evil, right? Like some people like to be like, define evil, blah, 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 moral relativism, blargity, blargity, blue. No, that's all nonsense. So for just a second, I was legitimately afraid they were going to make us hear this thing. And that's such a galactic empire thing to do, isn't it? To take the genocide of a peaceful people who are protesting the creation of a military base and turn it into a form of torture. Yeah, the fact that it's silence is great, and we cut straight from her scream to another scream. Direct reference to A New Hope, obviously. And also Empire, actually. This is also when we get a tiny little tidbit that there's only one bathroom break per shift. Did you catch that? You ever work a 12-hour shift with one bathroom break before? Scratch that. You ever work an 8-hour shift with one bathroom break? So yeah, it cuts into the thing with the drill to really get this across. Cassian has clearly been at this for quite a while now. Slowly sawing something in the background. Gets him a new in, so he gets in position, obviously. Scooches over there. Starts talking with the one guy. 2 men back. No weapons, no boots. And he's touching the rail. Of course he is. The guy even says a thing. You believe me now? Nothing that moves can fry you. Paying attention. Observant. Same thing they've been doing this whole time. Of course Cassian's trying to escape. Of frickin' course he is. Cut back to the torture. Excuse me. Cut back to the other torture. Now that Miro has had her fun, she starts the interrogation up again. Switch back to the hell. Ulaf is having more issues. Starting to lose memory, lose things. We told you 2 minutes ago. Switch back to the hotel. The prefect is discussing what to do with Miro. She says we're going to leave her alive as a potential future tool. But you can do whatever you want with Pac. The prefect says, with what I can only refer to as a bit of sadism in his voice, it seems to be a running thing here. I'd like to hang him. Make an example of him. Because that works. I know that's such a banal thing to point out, but the worst part about all of this is that doesn't work. Provably, demonstrably, does not work. And never has. We have centuries of history proving that doesn't work. Sorry. Of all things. Cut back to Mon Mothma giving a speech. You notice the pacing is just on point. Everything is just zooming through. Yeah, especially in somewhere like Ferrix. Yeah, well, they've already dealt with that thanks to the clone troopers. This cuts back to the Senate floor. Mon Mothma is giving her speech. And it's funny how her voice slowly loses a lot of its impact and emotion as she's giving the speech, which makes sense because bit by bit, some of the other senators actually start shutting off the lights of their things as they're like, yeah, I'm not in attendance anymore. I'm out. This is dumb and boring and not worth my time. And in the distance, we hear people arguing and yelling at each other. Boo! She speaks the truth! Long live the Empire! And I'm reminded of something else. How many of you have studied, we'll say, French, British, or American history? We'll go with any of those 3. Because if you have, you probably know that when you think in your head of senators in a Congress room, you probably have this mental image of a bunch of professional people, probably very boring, right? Delegation from such and such would like to argue. No. These are a bunch of children. These are a bunch of children who yell at each other and count names and physically assault each other, actually. Now, I know that's not quite as true as it used to be. But, like, that's a thing. Like, these are juveniles. And I think what I loved the most about this entire Senate scene was how accurately it got across the idea of just how blah, 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 these things actually were. And yeah, that's the best part. Thank you for pointing that out. This is even worse than the Senate was back in the Clone Wars. We already saw that the Senate was pathetic back in Episode 1 and Episode 2, and now it's turned into this nonsense. These are children. Which makes sense, actually. Remember, at this point, the Senate doesn't really have any actual power or say. I mean, for God's sakes, what is their daily job here? What is it they're actually doing? Yeah, this is all just to show how would you rule the galaxy. I'd be more regional about it. You can't rule a galaxy with one set of rules. You can't do what Palpatine is trying to do, to gray everything out. You got to acknowledge this area is like this area is like this area is like this. There's cultures, there's distinctions, there's individuals, there's different economic conditions, there's different physicalities, there's different biological requirements for different species. You have to actually sit down and think about what each area wants and needs. That's how you run a galaxy. The Republic was always doomed to fail the moment they put 1,000 people in one room and said, all right, agree on something. So, I really love Melshi in this. They could keep us in here forever if they wanted. And they're just holding him in a hallway. At this point, by the way, Olaf is actually struggling to breathe. At this point, I felt so clever for calling that he was having a stroke. But they keep hammering it in over and over and over again. It is so clear this man is dead functionally. Like, he is obviously having what we in the business refer to as a bad stroke. A stroke that is preventing him from functioning temporarily. But then it starts getting back, then it goes back to not working, then it goes back. I'm dead serious. I don't remember what the proper medical term, please forgive me. But it's when your body is working perfectly fine and then isn't, and then is, and then isn't, and then is. And that kind of stop and start to your systems, to your little organs, is actually what is then killing you. But they're all on that bridge, and everything's so tense, and everyone's yelling, and Kino has completely lost hold of the situation. He is actually having problems keeping everything under control. And then there's a power blip. Hi, Evo. The moment the power blipped, the actual note I just wrote was, oh no. Oh no. Because I know exactly what just happened. And I was right. Kino actually snaps. He is freaking out over this whole situation. He knows about the communications network people. He knows about the hand signals. He understands. He's clearly tacitly in favor of it. He could crack down on that if he wanted to. He's a floor manager. He doesn't. And he actually talks about how he's, you don't know anything. You don't know what's going on. Just get in your line. All we have is rumor. Come back to that. So, Vel is the cousin of Mon Mothma. I should have called that. I called that she was rich. She was the rich girl running. Yeah, how many hands does it take for word to get up here? Exactly, who, Thor? I love how Mothma is acting concerned for Vel, but it's Vel who is far more worried about Mothma. Cut back to the cell. How many guards are on each level? Cassian actually gives a wonderful speech here. Do you think they care what we say? Do you think they're listening? Do you think they care enough to make an effort? They don't need to care. All they have to do is turn this floor on twice a day and keep their numbers rolling. Why bother listening to us? We're nothing to them. Nobody's listening. Why would they? Melshi's right. We're cheaper than droids and easier to replace. I'm going to continue questioning that, by the way. But just like Nebulas in Star Trek, this appears to be a recurring thing. That slavery, let's call it what it is somehow cheaper and easier to do than droids, than factory work. Cut to the ISB, praying professional, and insisting. There's this wonderful scene where they talk about how Cassian is the connection to everything. He's the super amazing agent spy that pulls it all together. He's the agent of the Rebel Alliance. Maybe he's even like this super powerful, and we just can't find him anywhere. We've got all these leads and all this nothing, and he has vanished from the space. We can't find Cassian. He's the key to everything. I love that. They're all so focused on getting this guy who's in a factory making parts for the frickin' Death Star Excuse me. Sorry, I meant to say that later. I actually mentioned in the previous episodes I have a theory on what they're building. They're building a lot of parts, and a lot of different types of those parts are very standardized, and the kind of things you need for large-scale infrastructure construction. We also know that they are punching stuff out to Scarif on a higher rate lately. We also know, based on the timeline, that the Death Star is actually doing pretty well and doing its thing. So this is presumption on my part, but yeah, he's probably working on building parts for the frickin' Death Star. Anyways, and they need a lot more of these. This was actually mentioned last episode as well. They've been upping production. They've been firing? Let's go with enslaving more people lately to try and keep their production numbers up. And even despite how much they are throwing people into these factories en masse, thousands and thousands of people looking at all this crap, building all this crap. And they're actually still having trouble keeping quotas met. Do you see how long it took them to replace that one guy? That was, what, 3 days in lore? Yeah, Thrawn would look at this like, really? Not that Thrawn's a good guy either. So this cuts to Kino and another scene on the bridge. And I hate being right. So we find out, yeah, they fried a whole floor. A whole floor. And yeah, that drew the power. That's actually exactly how that works. So they fried the whole thing and killed a lot of people, a couple hundred people. Kino loses it. Just lose it. Melchi says they set them free, and Kino loses it and actually slugs him as hard as he can right in the gut. That is a hell of a punch. And what's really funny, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. We have heard nothing. Just another day, just another shift. Keep your mouths shut. And as he was talking, I swear to God this is true, I was writing in my notes, keep your head down in all caps. The theme, right? And then he actually says it. Keep your head down. Act natural or we're all dead. But there's this wonderful little tidbit. And we need to keep our mouths shut, keep our head down until we know what's going on. And that's the wonderful follow-through about keeping your head down. The light at the end of the tunnel that is being promised by the Galactic Empire on a grand scale is that things aren't actually that bad. I mean, they can't be, right? That's silly. That's ridiculous. That's conspiracy theorist. Come on. Things can't actually be... Let's just wait and see, okay? Let's see how things get. Let's see how things process. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Just... Of course, by the time you know, it's too late. We cut to Syril and his mother. I want this woman to die. The way they talk, the way that she lays into him. What is the return on my investment for all I've done for you? 2 meals a day. Whoa, 2 whole meals a day. Oh my God. Just, and the wonderful hostility. And there's this great bit where he comes down on her. He thinks he's so hard. I know you've been in my private box. I have ways of knowing. And she just slashes him to pieces, argues that he owes her, treats him like he's a burden, rather than that he's a son. It isn't until he finally admits that he's been promoted that her demeanor shifts. I'm so proud of you. Finally, you're making something of yourself. I'm so happy for you. Uncle Arho, or whatever his stupid name is, will be so pleased. This is great. She even pours him some extra cereal for that. I hate Syril, and he's a disgusting human being. But it's so easy to sympathize for him in the exact same breath. To look at this man who was worn down and broken down by a system designed to do exactly that to him, to his mother, to everyone around him. If his mother was a good person, would he become the fascist he is? That is always the question, isn't it? Nurture and nature is an argument we've been having for decades. Centuries, actually. Who knows? Is really the answer to that. I like to think there's a little bit of both. I do legitimately believe in the concept of free will and the ability to choose. So I have to admit that I would also say that individuals have a choice. Right? Nobody can make you feel shame, for example. Only you can feel shame. Little things like that. So obviously Syril has at least some culpability, regardless of all of the circumstances. But I'd like to think that if he had an actual honest-to-God family taking care of him, he might have been something better than this nonsense. I agree completely, Linnaeus. Olaf really is physically starting to fall behind. Like, really, really hard. One moment, please. Yeah, table 5 is literally worse than a man down. They still managed it. Did you catch that? They still weren't the last ones. And for the first time, they show what happens to the table that's furthest behind. Did you catch that, too? They just fried them right there on the spot. Just in front of everybody. We cut to Perrin and Mon Mothma and Vel. Perrin says, "You find yourself a husband yet?" And, Vel obviously says, "Not exactly. I've got other priorities." And then his response is, "Well, you need a widower at this point. Who's left to value at your age?" An astonishing amount of exposition happens in that in those, like, 3 sentences. Really. You could say that this is how disgusting of a person Perrin is, but actually, I have to point out that this says so much about the culture on display here. There is a strong implication, and this is something that was true in real life, that the Chandrillans, who, remember, are married off at 15, as part of an arranged marriage that's arranged by their parents, especially if they're in the nobility, nothing about that indicates that pairing has to be male-female, right? However, given the way that the nobility functions and operates, you have to understand that by definition there has to be a male-female pairing, because that way they'll have children. Now you're probably thinking, where are you going with all this lore? It was a real thing for quite a bit of real-life history that, Noble A and Noble B would marry and have kids, and neither of them would actually be married to each other, right? They would have someone else who's their actual lover, someone who they are actually in love with and actually want to be with, or maybe they're just like having tons and tons of sex in a way. And yeah, this may or may not actually be legally getting rid of homosexuality, because how to the surface that is debatable. In Chandrilla's sake, obviously in real life you couldn't be gay, but lots of people were. But yeah, married on paper. That's exactly where I'm going with. But then there's the real lover over there. And I find myself wondering if that's what's going on here, because that also leads to his further comment, who's left of value at your age? Vel is not old. Vel's probably half my age. Okay, that's an exaggeration. But still, she's... yeah. And yet, it gets across the idea. I love his sentence because it comes across as someone who isn't really concerned so much as just saying the obvious, right? I know that sounds weird, but let me lay this out this way. Given the implications on hand here, and how the nobility of Chandrilla works, it's very, very likely that anybody who's considered a good match, politically, of course, is already taken. They were probably bargained away when they were children. And you get where I'm going with this. From his perspective... Yeah, no kidding, Rax. From his perspective, there really isn't anyone else left of value. Because the only reason you would actually marry someone is, of course, for their political connections. That's almost assuredly why he and Mon Mothma got married, after all. Food for thought. At least you haven't gotten political these days. All the interesting people are terribly boring now. Yeah, unless they're a widower. That's your one in. Find someone whose wife has died, who's got position and power and prominence. Pathetic. Then we have a scene where Vel, who I remind you is a level 1 nobody and a terrible leader, and she is, let's just be honest about this, who is in way over her head, ends up comforting and supporting Mon Mothma. This is one of the final points I will make about why I enjoy low-tier stories so much and why they can be so good. Because, to put this in as simple terms as possible, Luke Skywalker does not exist in a vacuum. That whole support network, all those little people, matter. And there's nothing wrong with zooming the camera in to one of those little people. Hell, this applies literally to Rogue One, where a bunch of nobody's ever heard of before or since pretty much directly led to the destruction of the Death Star and the creation of the Rebel Alliance. Rebels, the show, is all about this particular theme. Then we cut to Syril stalking, literally stalking Miro. Jesus Christ, Syril. What he's doing is a crime in real life. Oh, absolutely 040. But that's sort of my point, isn't it? No, this was legitimately an uncomfortable scene to watch. This was actually an unpleasant scene to watch. I wanted to thank you for promotion. What do you think I had anything to do with it? Well, my boss said you had to do with it. All we did was give you a clean bill of health. There you do, you did it. You cleared your name. He gives a speech that you can tell he's rehearsed. I tried to write this down as much as I could. Just being in your presence. Let me rewind a second. The first thing he actually says there is that finally seeing that someone else understood how dangerous Cassian Andor was. That's how he starts all this. You have to understand. You have to process this. This man is hinging his entire life worth and his entire self-view of the galaxy and reality on the idea that there's this one terrifyingly dangerous murderer out there who has to be brought to justice no matter what, and that it's frickin' Cassian. Who, I remind you, at this point is still level 1. Just being in your presence, I realized that life is worth living. I realized that if nothing else, there is justice and beauty in the galaxy. And if I just kept going, perhaps my deranged belief that there was something better fated for me in the future was a dream worth clinging to. Syril absolutely sees Miro as his designated love interest. And this is... He is... Yeah, no, she's basically already his girlfriend in whatever creepy, sad land he has in his head. And I just... Yeah, no, I had trouble both writing down and reading that speech because that is actually disgusting. I am shocked she doesn't have him killed on the spot, something she could get away with without hesitation. This man is so terrible. She lets him off extremely easily, probably because she realizes how astonishingly pathetic he is, and unfortunately I think we will all regret that decision. I do like how her next scene is just there to show how creeped out she is by Syril, which says something considering this is a woman from enforcement who just finished torturing a few people, and was in fact on her way to torture someone else before, you know, she realized there was no time. We then have a wonderful scene with Tay and Mon Mothma, and this is probably the first scene where we start to see how much Mon Mothma is still kind of early on in her being a rebel leader, which makes sense. We've actually seen... oh yeah, he actually physically... I'm sorry, I didn't even mention this. He physically grabs her arm to prevent her from interrupting his speech. She just tried to walk away in the middle of it. He had to finish his whole speech. Oh my god! Mon Mothma, just like Luthen, is not used to working under this environment. Mothma has been very good at being quietly in the background for a long time. Luthen has been very good at being quietly in the background for a long time. Mon Mothma is now starting to see a little bit of how difficult it is to operate when things have gotten more loud. In point and fact, she realizes very quickly that Tay is much more on top of things than she ever has been. And there's this wonderful tidbit where she starts to realize that not only is this her fault, I mean, it's Palpatine's fault, but it's her fault. But if she had actually been a little bit more careful from the word go, she wouldn't have the issues she's having right now. But she didn't know how to operate under such circumstances. She did not know how to operate when there was that level of oversight, when there was that level of oppression on display. She was quiet in the background, keeping her head down. Oh, she wasn't doing it to the extent that other people were, but she was. So Tay name drops someone. We don't actually need the specifics. Davos Golden is a crime lord, banker. And she's starting to see how much worse this is getting and how much worse it's going to get. And how much she's going to have to move and adapt and twist in order to tolerate what is necessary in order to have what happened. This is a discussion Luthen's probably already had in his own head several times. But Mothma? The mere fact that she is this disinclined to interact with someone who is, let's call him what he really is, a crime lord, says all it needs to. But that's the point, isn't it? Like, even someone like Saw you can work with, right? He's got a cause. A little too paranoid, a little too violent, but he's got the drive. It's easier to swallow that particular pill. Yeah, Saw's a war hero. Literally. This dude, who knows what he's up to? Maybe he sells drugs to children. Maybe he is a slaver. Maybe he just runs a protection racket. That's nice and clean, right? Who knows? We don't know yet. I have a feeling we will. And she's starting to see that. You could see on her face. God, I love the actress who plays Mon Mothma so much. You can see on her face just how much that she is starting to process how bad this is all going to go. How much more types of people she's going to have to deal with. Cut right to the ISB, and we find out that one of Krieger's group has been caught. And they are disturbingly on point with how they deal with that. And they want the Krieger assault to go forward. And if you remember, the Krieger assault was the one that Luthen was just trying to get assistance for from Saw, connecting those threads together. This is when we see that the other people are tortured in front of them, and Ulaf is literally losing the ability to stand. Kino, of course, gives it him. First of all, of course he does. I'm sorry. I called that on day one. Of course Kino cares. However hard he may come across, he is obviously interested in the well-being of his people. But the med tech who comes in is barefoot, and we don't need anything else. The moment we see that, we understand, okay, they're another prisoner. And boy, I feel that. A little tidbit they don't really tell you. An enormous amount of the workforce in most prisons and jails is actually prisoners. And they get other little tidbits of benefits for doing so. Sometimes better food, sometimes more private quarters, sometimes they get access to certain things like television that other people don't get. Sometimes they literally get paid, although it's put into an account they have no access to. Stuff like that. So we bring in the prisoner, who happens to be a medical technician. He's only got 40 shifts left. I just want to get him up and about. I don't want to know his name. He's only got 40 shifts left. We just get him something to get him through the next few days. And of course, he's had a massive stroke. Called that, unfortunately, for the second time today. And there's this really, really horrible progression. What's happened on level 2? Kino's not stupid. Actually, Cassian asks first what happened on level 2, and the medtech says, piss off. Don't ask. Take care of your people. And Kino catches onto that like that. He can tell something's up here. What do you mean, keep my men in line? What happened on 2? They made a mistake. The man who was released on 4 ended up on 2 the next day, and they fried the whole floor. No one's getting out. Not now. Not after this. But at least your friend is free. He's right about that one, too. Hey, chat. How many guards on each level? If I can get selfish for just a second, if you'll permit me the indulgence. I could discuss the fact that there's only 12 people per floor, but honestly, I called that originally, if you remember. When they first showed up at the thing, the first thing I noticed was that they are understaffed and undercompetent. It's self-apparent. It's right there on the screen. But if there's something that I want to do someday I want to write a scene that hits people as hard as this one did. Someday I want people to watch something I've made, whether it's a rewrite, or a theater, or an original work, or a choose-your-own-adventure, or a novel, or anything. I don't want those people. I want people to have the kind of reaction that this has. I want to be able to have that kind of impact. I want to be able to generate what I'm feeling right now in other people someday. Because the power of that scene is insane. It is also the power of context. Context is king, after all. I do agree that this show is ultimately about hope, and ultimately that's why we're going to be having a whole speech tomorrow. I've already got it prepped. Don't worry, it's not as creepy as Syril's. Or is it? Sorry. Purple. I'm sorry. I don't even think this is a debate. Would anyone like to disagree? No, I could see that later. I caught it too when I first heard it. Neon purple. Yeah, you can't actually see it. It's ultraviolet, but you know. I love how... So for those of you who've been paying attention to the spreadsheet, first of all, you're awesome and I appreciate you. But second of all, I have pie charts keeping track of the percentages of how much of a particular thing we're covering is what color. And it's been very amusing to me, because Andor was solid red, and then got a little bit of purple, then got a little bit more red. And the purple chunk of the pie has been slowly growing every episode for 2 days now. The link that just showed up in chat is how you access the spreadsheet. Eternus. You type !Streaminations and it's there. However, for those of you not aware, it's also on the website. I actually replaced the review document with this document at the top of the website while we're going through the Streaminations, because it's going to be probably about a month or so, if my estimations are even close to accurate. Yeah, I'm almost going to be relieved when we hit Mandalorian, because I anticipate enjoying Mandalorian, but it's not going to be this. And Edge Runners, I have no hope for Edge Runners actually being good. And then we'll hit Donkey Kong Country Show. And the only question there is, will the score be 0? So, because it's going to be so relaxing, Linearith. I can just be like, oh man, this is trash! Am I enjoying this show? This hasn't hit Justified levels for me yet. If I can talk about that out loud for just a moment. Justified, the reason Justified bothered me was because it touched on topics I don't like even acknowledging exist. I know that's pathetic and selfish and cowardly, and I don't care because it's true. It's deeply unpleasant in a very realistic and horrifying kind of a way. It is a show centered around the deep Kentucky drug ring operation from the perspective of some cops. Of course it's awful. And I couldn't deal with it. That's why I cut off Justified. That's why I said I'm not doing past season 1, right? This hits hard in a way that I can only refer to as personal. But doesn't bother me as much, if that makes any kind of sense at all. It's not something that I want to get off my screen. And that probably sounds familiar because I've been talking about that for something like 12 years now. I've been doing this job a long time. Because there's a difference, right? There's a difference between a character you hate, or a scene you hate, or an episode you hate, and then one you just want to get off your screen. That's different. Right? Something you want off your screen is something you literally don't want to engage with. Something you literally don't actually want to physically watch. That's why I use that terminology. That's my own terminology. You just get it off the screen. I don't want to look at that character. I don't want to see this episode. I don't want this here. Get out of here. But yeah, like Syril, he's close. But Syril is massively engaging in how wonderfully well portrayed he is. He's not get off my screen territory. And of course, this varies. Everyone's going to have different perspectives on this. I know someone, for example, over in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, some people consider Opaka, Kai Opaka, to be get off their screen material. She's actually not for me. She's horrifying and messed up and extremely evil. Or not Opaka. I actually screwed up my name. I'm sorry. Kai Wynn. Kai Wynn, not Kai Opaka. Opaka was the first one. Jesus Christ, Laura. I've got too many names in my head. I don't know what you want from me. Kai Wynn is not get off screen territory for me because she's so well written, so well acted, so well presented, and done so. Yeah, her performance helps salvage her, I think. I've said that before. Another perfect example of this is Rendon Howe over in Dragon Age Origins. Someone who is a disgusting, slimy, terrible, horrible person who happens to be voiced by a great actor who does a great job of adding life to the role. It's very common that an actor will actually pull someone up out of get off my screen territory and make them far more engaging. And I was just about to bring up Syril in this very show. This actor, this theater actor, has been doing fantastic acting since the first 10 seconds he's been on screen. I called that in his very, very, very first scene back in episode 1. This man is amazing and helps sell this guy. He helps salvage him because in a worse actor, in a worse presentation, there's a pretty good chance that Syril would actually devolve into get off my screen territory. But so far, we haven't hit there. Who's an example of get off my screen? Naturally, I can't think of any off the top of my head. I'd have to think about it because usually I just get them out of my head because that's the point. I don't want to think about them. So I'd have to think about it to come up with an example. You know what? Yeah, actually, Dolores Umbridge. That's actually a good example. Thank you, Blade Travell. If you know who it is, there you go. If you don't worry about it. Star Child in Mass Effect 3. Anyways, I'm going to go and grab lunch. So I'm going to be a little bit more delayed in coming back than usual. But we are covering the 3rd episode here, which is Season 1, Episode 10, One Way Out.